Hi, I'm John, your host, and welcome to Heart of Care, a podcast by AMCU. Here, we delve into the real voices of healthcare, sharing stories of resilience, humanity, and the unwavering heart that drives it all. Join us as we empathize, learn, support, and even find moments to laugh together. Thanks for being here.
Welcome to Heart of Care, Episode 7, Hate Speech and Polarization, the show that looks beneath the surface to understand what's shaping our world and ourselves. I'm your host, Laura from AMCU. Today we're tackling something that feels increasingly pervasive, something sharp and often ugly that we encounter online, in the news, and sometimes even in our daily interactions. We're talking about hostility, cynicism, and the way it seems to be targeting people who are simply trying to do good. We're exploring the idea of hate speech, not just in its most extreme forms, but as a kind of everyday language. And what happens when misfortune turns on the almost fortunate? Let's start with hate speech itself. We often think of it as something extreme, confined to dark corners of the internet. But the reality is, it's become, every day. It's in the sharp sarcasm, the feedback that feels designed to humiliate, the cruelty masked uncomfortably as concern. You see it in social media comments, in angry online reviews, furious phone calls, and yes, even in what passes for policy debate these days. But why? Why has this become so incredibly common? We're drawing from today suggests it's a symptom of a deeper malaise, a world grappling with escalating frustration, with systems that feel broken, and with a fundamental erosion of trust. And when people feel powerless, when they feel unseen, their instinct is to lash out. But they don't typically target the most powerful. They target those who are most visible. Instead of confronting the true source of their pain, they project it sideways. And often, tragically, their aim is directed at the very people who still bother to care. This plays out vividly when we encounter differing ideas. Freedom of speech is a cornerstone of democracy. Absolutely. It's the freedom to express views, share ideas, challenge injustice. But increasingly, in our hyper-reactive culture, free speech doesn't lead to healthy debate. It dissolves into hostility. Sometimes it ends with just 2 words. Fuck you. That isn't disagreement. That's dehumanization. It reflects a growing inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to hold the tension that comes with different perspectives. When logic fails, when values don't align, people aren't just walking away. They're fighting. They're labeling. They're canceling. They're hating. And why? Because disagreement has become intolerable. And care, especially public, principled, selfless care, that feels deeply unsettling to some. Success is met with envy. Advocacy is viewed with suspicion. Empathy is mocked. If you dare to stand for something, anything, you'll likely hear the familiar refrains. Stay in your lane. You're just doing this for attention. Why don't you just quietly donate? This is the real, profound emotional toll of visibility, and it's a burden that weighs particularly heavily on professionals, like doctors, teachers, anyone in public-facing roles trying to make a difference. Where does this mistrust come from? It's not random. This all point to the developmental roots, tracing back to Erik Erikson's first stage of life. Trust versus mistrust. If, as children, we experienced inconsistent care, betrayal, or conditional affection, we often grow into adults who find it incredibly difficult to trust. And that difficulty is often most pronounced when faced with someone openly demonstrating care. This early mistrust warps perception. The more compassion someone offers, the more likely their motives are suspected. The more someone stands for a cause, the more their intentions are doubted. The bitter irony here is that many of those expressing this hostility are themselves searching desperately for trust, but their own pain blinds them to the people actually offering it. They shout, "You don't care about us," while simultaneously attacking the very individuals still trying to help. This dynamic is amplified and exploited in the political sphere. Politics, ideally, should be about ideas, about policy debates. But it's increasingly devolved into a campaign of character assassination. When politicians' arguments are weak, what do? They pivot to personal attacks. They demonize academics, journalists, healthcare workers, anyone asking questions or demanding accountability. It's not a debate. It's a performance designed to train the public to do the same. A doctor speaks about policy, branded as greedy. A nurse starts a fundraiser, accused of self-interest. The public begins to mimic this behavior, taught implicitly that truth is secondary and dominance is paramount. And where is this behavior most visible, most amplified? The media ecosystem, particularly social media. Social media doesn't reward truth. It rewards outrage. The more hateful the comment, the wider its reach. The more polarizing the post, the more engagement it gets. The algorithms are, in essence, calibrated for rage, not for reason. This is why we see digital discourse dominated by defense mechanisms. Projection, for example. Disowning your own fear or failure by throwing it at others. Feeling helpless, you call others weak. Feeling ignored, you accuse others of arrogance. Bias, reducing complex human beings to simple stereotypes. A doctor becomes a rich snob, a social worker, a handout enabler. In extreme forms, antisocial behavior, acting without empathy, with intentional cruelty. These aren't misunderstandings, they're attacks designed to hurt. And other defense mechanisms like rationalization or displacement, it's easier to accuse a caring person of virtue signaling than to examine why that care feels so alien or threatening to you. The consequence of all this? Good people withdraw. They leave the public sphere. Or worse, good people break. Because goodwill is fragile, and it dies quickly when cruelty goes viral. It leads to a kind of death of integrity in the public square. We inhabit a world where the loudest critics often know the least about the topic, where those who have never led anything demand the most from leaders, where those who have never personally helped anyone seem convinced they know exactly how everyone else should help. Care has become a performance to be judged, not a value to be protected and fostered. Let's look at a couple of examples that really bring this home. First, one of our own John's story. John co-created the Heart of Care podcast, a free, ad-free project aimed at raising awareness about Australia's struggling healthcare system and world's advocacy against injustice. He poured his time, his energy, even his own money into it. And still, he received this comment. "You're a fraud. Are you typing this from your Mercedes?" That's not feedback. It's pure projection. It's pain, envy, and mistrust rolled into one small, petty line. It perfectly illustrates how cynical our culture has become. We can't even see an act of generosity, an act of care, without immediately fabricating corruption or ulterior motives. That same person asking John to stop talking, start taking action. What John is doing is taking action, but still he is subjected to raw, unjust criticism. Of course, it is 1 out of 100, but it can be painful to a person who is trying his best, doing what he do, not to win a fight, but just to make a stand against injustice. Then there's Evan's story. During his GP training, Evan worked under a GP supervisor who, despite her formal role, consistently kept her door closed. Not occasionally, it was her norm for many years. Even during downtime, even when junior doctors were clearly struggling. She gave Evan a direct instruction. If my door is closed, don't knock. Not for questions, not for support. Just don't come. This wasn't about being busy. It was a pattern leaving trainees isolated in an already stretched system. Years later, Evan shared a public post. He didn't name her. He didn't insult her. He simply stated, "I will never be that kind of supervisor. A closed door is not mentorship." He committed to a different way of leading. But the response from some peers? Harsh. You lack empathy. Do you even know what she was going through? Rather than reflecting on the critical message about mentorship culture, they defended the dysfunction. They criticized him for speaking out, not because what he said was untrue, but because it made them uncomfortable. They said, "You're judging her without knowing her story. She might have been going through something you don't understand. These weren't about professional standards. They were about emotional discomfort, protecting a dysfunctional status quo because silence is often rewarded, and reflection is treated like a betrayal. Even within a caring profession, speaking up against poor leadership can trigger this kind of backlash, not just from outside, but from peers who feel exposed. Evan's story takes a truly cruel turn. In a separate event, he took a short leave of absence because his wife miscarried their unborn daughter. One of the hardest weeks imaginable. And during that time, a patient, perhaps unaware, perhaps simply uninterested in the reality of his life, left a public review. He just left for a week. Didn't even let me know where he was going. Probably on holiday. This doctor don't care about us patients. All he do is taking holiday. I wouldn't even take my dog to this clinic. A patient don't expect his doctor to have sick days. A man grieving his child. A doctor mourning in silence. And still, he was publicly shamed. This is the grim outcome when we reduce people to their roles, expecting care without acknowledging the very real human cost to the person providing it. This isn't just individual cruelty. It's systemic. Other obvious highlights are how government narratives play a role. Campaigns often use inflammatory language and misleading headlines. GPs earning $400,000, Medicare rorts cost billions, doctors refusing bulk billing. These aren't objective reports. They're calculated attacks, ammunition aimed at the very people trying to hold up a crumbling system. Instead of being angry at failing policy, the public is handed an easier target: their doctor. The misfortunate are taught to hate the almost fortunate. This speaks to a new class divide, an attack on the middle class, particularly professionals like doctors, teachers, public sector workers. Once respected pillars of society, they are now routinely demeaned. This isn't accidental. It's manufactured. For decades, governments have eroded public services while promoting consumer individualism, effectively diverting public frustration away from the wealthy elite and towards professionals who are visible enough to envy, but ordinary enough to attack. Consider that common complaint. My doctor bulk bills me, spends 30 minutes, drives a Mercedes, lives in a $4 million house. If they can do that, why are other doctors complaining? It's a simple, emotional story, entirely anecdotal, but it obliterates complexity. It assumes every doctor works the same, has the same costs, that a car or house is pure excess, not tied to debt or sacrifice. It fuels the false belief that if one visible professional appears successful, all others claiming struggle must be faking it. The person telling this story doesn't need truth. They need a target. And often when they say it aloud to someone advocating, the intent isn't to inform. It's to intimidate. To make the caring person feel foolish, to shame them into silence, to drown advocacy in sarcasm. It's saying, stop complaining, you're all the same. This is envy disguised as fairness, shutting down advocacy not with argument, but with mockery. This isn't fact-based. It's fueled by policy neglect and corrosive public narrative, encouraging judgment based on optics, not reality. Doctors become scapegoats for systemic failure, teachers for educational decline, public servants as barriers, never victims of neglect. This manufactured divide thrives by pitting neighbor against neighbor. The struggling are trained to resent the surviving. The misfortunate are trained to hate the almost fortunate. So how do we begin to solve this? I think we should start by rebuilding a culture of dignity, one where contribution is honored and suffering isn't a competition for who has it worse. We need to stop asking, who has more? And start asking, who is still standing with us, trying to help? We need new stories, narratives where visibility isn't synonymous with villainy, and where care is recognized not as a luxury or a performance, but as a courageous act in a world that makes it increasingly difficult. We need policies that strengthen communities, not divide them. And crucially, we need to speak up. Not just for ourselves, but for those next in line to be blamed and attacked. We can do better, but only if we truly see the harm being done. We must remember some fundamental truths that seem to be getting lost. Not all visibility is a sign of privilege. Not every absence is driven by selfishness. Not every advocate is motivated purely by self-interest. Care is not the enemy here. Cruelty is. Hate speech isn't just a problem in politics or the media. It's become an everyday habit, found in sarcastic comments, online reviews, and public forums. It's no longer about disagreement. It's about dominance. When someone offers care or compassion, especially in public, they're often mocked, dismissed, or even attacked. Why? Because people are angry. They feel let down by institutions, by leaders, by life. And when real solutions seem out of reach, they lash out at the closest person who appears to be doing okay. In today's world, that's often your neighbor, your teacher, your local small business owner, or anyone who shows empathy or tries to make a difference. Let's stand together and make our world better. Thank you for listening to Heart of Care. We hope this episode has given you some perspective on the hidden costs of cynicism and the importance of protecting the space for care.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode from AMCU Media, where real stories, healthcare, and advocacy come together. We release a new episode on the 28th of every month. We're a small, independent team doing our best to bring you meaningful conversations. And your support means the world to us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and Facebook page. Just search for AMCU Media. Got a story or topic to share? Email us at amcu@strmedical.com.au. Together, we can do better. For care, for community, and for change. Until next time, thank you. And take care.